welcome everybody. Like I say, I met at Nippin and Dundee, and we've been talking for a few years, messaging and all that sort of stuff. And I have to tell this story, Nippin. So I jumped on a train to Dundee to meet Nippin, and he's like, "Oh, my car's broken down." And I was like, "What? I can't believe it. I've come all this way, and I'm going to miss you." But he managed to make his way down, and we had a great chat. And really, that's how this came about. I said, well, we might not do a live event. Let's try and see if we can do an online book club and see how different that can be and what kind of experience. And Josh and I have done these before with people, but we obviously didn't have an audience. So I thought, hey, let's have a crack and see how it goes. But Nippin, just to sort of kick off, I'd love to sort of ask you about a pretty significant event that occurred nearly 40 years ago in just off Aberdeen. And I was watching a YouTube clip the other night there, and there was a guy talking about Piper Alpha, and he was saying that he was worried that the Piper is going to be forgotten. So I'm kind of wondering if, because you're in Aberdeen, I was thinking, is that does the Piper Alpha come up in conversation? Is it something you hear a lot about?
Yeah, I think the Scottish people are very nostalgic in some ways about it, but also because it's a very historical thing, and I think it passes on from one generation to another. I don't think there is a safety event in Aberdeen that goes without at least mentioning the Piper Alpha event, if not talking about it in detail. So it happens. Yeah, it's something that I think it's in the history, it's in the memory of people, and they hold it very dearly to themselves. And I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really, like I say, when I watched that clip, I was like, oh wow, I didn't think anybody would think that. But Nippin, I suppose, really tell us about your book. How did it start to come to fruition?
Where do I start? So you I had a personal experience of an accident on board a ship myself. I was a seafarer, and I had an accident in 2003, near accident. It was so as the outcome of that accident, it was framed like I was the one to be blamed for that accident, um, and I think that left a really deep kind of um yeah. So it was because of that accident I quit my first career at sea, um, and then it took me almost about 7 or 8 years to come out of that negative spiral. But also, when I enrolled for a PhD in anthropology at Cardiff University, what I realized was, because I came from a technical discipline as a ship captain, what I realized from that experience was that there are many different ways of looking at the same experience. Um, and off and on, I kept seeing that in safety reporting systems when I worked for DNV as a safety inspector for nearly about 6 years or so. I kept seeing the difference between how people perceive their realities and how it is documented, for example. What the real shock was when I met with this Costa Concordia accident happened, and I had the opportunity to travel to Italy to meet the captain of the ship. I spent 4 days with him, and I think that kind of that experience resonated with me, and I felt there is so much in this accident that has been framed in ways that is so far away from the lived reality of the captain. So I looked at various aspects of the accident, all the way from how this grounding and capsizing of the ship happened, all the way up to how he was framed as the main cause of the accident, and nothing really made sense from his perspective. So there was a big gap between what the documentation said and what he had to say about it. So, and I think that really led me to kind of weave my own experiences into the book. It's a very, I mean, I never actually talk about the philosophy in the book, but it's a very existentialist, phenomenological kind of reading, but it's kept the reading very accessible and easy to read. Lots of personal experiences blended in the book. So in many ways, I think Job pointed out, Job Hovinger, he said, yeah, he said he's right. There's lots in that book, all the way from my own experiences to the Costa Concordia accident.
Yeah.
That was it. And the thing that I would like to make very, very clear from the beginning is that I have no interest in accidents, and somehow people see it that way. My prime interest is in learning and unlearning. And that's really something that I'm very passionate about. So that if you read that book and if you want to learn about accidents, I think there are better books to read. But if you want to learn how, you're faced with a reality and how you face that discomfort and dissonance and that changes you as a person, I think that's what the book is about. And that to me is both unlearning and learning. Yeah.
Nippin, how would we have that conversation with people though? Like you've been, we hear this a lot that there's no point, there is no, there's nothing. Accidents are not that exciting. There's nothing that interesting in them. How could we have that conversation with in our workplaces?
So your question again is?
So you just sort of said that you've got no interest in accidents. You only care about the learning. How could we have that conversation? Because when we are in our workplaces, they are very interested in accidents and accident prevention. I'm just wondering if you could give us some
Yeah,
hints and
yeah,
tips how we
yeah.
could maybe change our conversation or.
But you see, this is the fascinating thing, isn't it? That you have such a big accident. A ship goes so close to the coast, it capsizes. 32 people die as a result of that, and you create a reality that is absolutely so far away from what really happened. So why are we not interested in accident? Because I think, well, I think that the thing is that it pushes it really pushes us to the boundaries of our worldviews. That what you have been imagining so far, what you have been thinking about so far, is not right, is not true, is so far away from reality. So, for example, in this particular case, people genuinely believe that when the ship sails close to the island, it is about 20 miles away, and if you ever have to do a deviation, you will first approach the office. But none of that holds true in this instance, for example. So, how do you cope with this reality as an organization? And I think this is where the dilemma is that, we tend to think of organizational learning and organizations learn. I think we maybe just slow down and think about it. What does that really mean? Because organizations don't learn, people learn. Some few people will learn and they might change their view about it. But to say that organizations learn and organizations will change, I think we anthropomorphize the organization, which to me is a fantasy land. It doesn't happen. Yeah. So people change, people learn, people unlearn, people take the next step. But organizations, no, no. I think we need to just think about this a little bit.
Yeah, we had that question come in from Leslie, and it sort of leans into the sort of first question that I had as well. And also, everyone, if you've got a question, I would really love you to chime in.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, because I
So
think the starting point really is that my work is all person centered. It's not human centered. It's not organization centered. So I'd rather answer your questions and engage with you than coming up with what I think is good. So please just drop a question or ask a question and let's just engage. I think that would be fantastic.
yeah, definitely. Getting that was a reason why we wanted to invite everybody in so that we could have all these different questions. So if you've got something, jump in. But Nippin, the question from Leslie was, what role does the media have in this sensationalism? And the question that I had as well was, in the book, you talked about the hero versus the anti-hero narrative, and we love a good villain, right? And that, I think that's the media definitely portrays the villains, because you talked about Captain Sully and then Captain Chiteno. So yeah, what role does the media play in these massive events?
Yeah, so I think instead of answering that question, let's take a step back and see why do stories like this, that the captain left the ship, before all the passengers were evacuated. Why does a story like this appeal to the masses? Because that's what media is doing. It's basically, catering to the needs of the masses. I think that the answer to that question is that masses have no time to think. They need something, they need a narrative, they need a story that can connect with them viscerally. So, for example, you go on LinkedIn and you see somebody putting out a life story of success through many, many, many failures. And that resonates with people, and there are 20, 30, 50,000 likes and reshares and comments of well done and so on. So what is really happening here is I'd encourage you to read the work of Joseph Campbell, for example, the hero with a thousand faces. And the point is that that we are creators of stories. We like stories that fit into our worldview. And so if you go to, for example, look at the Greek myth. In the Greek myth, the classic Greek myth is that a hero is someone who can create order out of chaos. Right. So here you have Sully, for example, Captain Sully Sullenberger, bird strike, engine failure. What happens next is that he leads you through salvation. He leads from chaos. He turns the situation into order. Of course, there is a lot more happening here, but we want that narrative. We want to hear that superhero narrative because that's going from chaos to order. That's the Greek myth at play, right? And that's the hero narrative. So deep inside, we want that some kind of a story that we are viscerally familiar with, unconsciously familiar with. And the moment we see that, we don't question it anymore as uncritical masses. And this is what the risk and safety industry needs to be a little bit more critical about, because we are not uncritical masses, right? We are sensible, critical people who should be able to understand that you cannot attribute the success of this accident to just one person. Now you move into the Costa Concordia accident, or what you see is an anti-hero narrative. And this is if you like, not Christian religion, but the Christian myth at play, which is that that you have to follow the word of the Son of God. And if you don't follow that, and if you deviate from those rules, then obviously you have not done a good job. And that's what this character is meant to, I mean, the story is meant to portray. The whole accident narrative hinges on one particular sentence, which is that accident, that Schettino is the main cause of the accident, and it so chimes with the masses. Why? Because deep inside we want to hear that anti-hero narrative, the Christian myth at play. So but then the interesting thing is, when you come from a country like India, none of this makes sense because we don't have the hero and the anti-hero narratives. What we have is in our stories, it's not the comedy or the tragedy. It's not, it often evokes 10 to 12 to 15 emotions, very, very different emotions. So our stories don't quite fit into that, from uncertainty to certainty, or the anti-hero myth. And hence, so the idea is that the more you travel, the more you look at things from another perspective, another worldview, the more you start to question that my reality is probably not the most complete reality. And I think that's a good place to be in, because the more you see reality from different perspectives, the more you become curious to say, okay, what does this culture have to say? What does that culture have to say? What does new generation have to say about it? And so you start to think, okay, there's a lot more to the story than just the hero and the anti-hero narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a compelling read when you were talking about Captain Chiteno, and it actually put me on a bit of a down a rabbit hole looking at some of this stuff that was happening with him. Actually,
But
are you feel
Stephen,
for him?
yeah, but you don't even have to look at something as grand as that. You can pick up a near miss report, and it actually absolutely follows the same mythical order.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely bang on. Hey, we had a question from Gary Marling. Nippin, it was like, what's one common practice in safety that we keep doing, even though it might be doing more harm than good? And I think probably everybody in this one could sort of ask that question. But yeah, what's the one common practice in safety that we keep doing, even though it might be doing more harm than good? Curious about
Well,
that one, mate.
why just safety? Let's just talk about what is that one thing we do in life that we keep doing even though it doesn't work. And I'd say stop controlling and start listening to people. Stop coming to every conversation with the view that you want to fix this person. I think that's so embedded both in safety, and I think in some ways in this rational world where every 5 minutes that you spend you must come up with a solution, or your profession or your professional identity does not exist. So I think we need to challenge some of these ideas around um, uh, and so stop controlling and start listening to people. And I think that is where the conversation needs to start, whether it's accident investigation, audits, whatever. But we're not good at listening to people.
Do you know, mate? I had we chatted before everyone came on, but a similar experience again for me today. I was out in the field with some safety guys, and they took their iPads and the clipboards and that sort of thing, and I put everything down, and I just sat and had a cup of tea and sat down with them and said, "Hey, tell me about your day." And it was it's such a difference. See when you just go in there and you're just like, I just want to listen to you, I just want to talk to you. I don't want to know. I'm not here to, like, it's went from a clipboard to a virtual clipboard with iPads, right? Mate, just in the book as well, you talked about relationships being the key to learning. So, in your view, how often do investigators forget they're dealing with humans and not case files? And that's, and I see that a lot, and I guarantee every single person in this call is the same thing. We'd be keen to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's a classic problem of a materialist worldview. It's I think it's so deeply embedded in us, Stephen, that we don't even realize this. So, what are some of the material philosophies that continue to influence our thinking without us even knowing? So, you pick up any book on safety, any book on safety, you look at the cover, the first thing you see is objects. Where does that thinking come from? And and so if you think about it a little bit, what are the big philosophies in risk and safety? Deontology, which is duty of care, positivism, which is yes and no, um, utilitarianism, which is for the greater good, just culture, for example, um, rationalism, which is uh, uh, explanations like why this happened. Then we have the what's the Kantian philosophy. Anyway, there's about, but which is driven by logic. Everything must have a priori, which is there should be a universal explanation for everything, which is Kantian. I think that's deontology. So there are about five or six philosophies, Stephen, and they all come from a very material view of the world, which is that everything can be reduced to matter. Everything can be reduced to matter, and and I think in some sense it works. There is some merit to saying and doing that, but the trouble is that a lot of human behavior cannot be reduced to measurables. It cannot be. So you need to go into other ways of thinking about what does it mean to be a human being. So when you come from a material worldview, to answer your question, the tendency is to reduce human being into an object. Um, and that it's not that it's our intention to do that. We have been trained and brought up in that worldview that inadvertently we will fall into that trap no matter what. I mean, look at the question, the classic question, how can I support work? I mean, why work? Why not the person?
Mm.
Right? I mean, that's
Yep.
something to think about. Why is it that all our energy is focused on the physical environment? What is missing in this discourse? And I'm not suggesting that that it's wrong, but there is something fundamentally missing, is which is the human person. So when you go into other worldviews, for example, hermeneutics and existentialism and phenomenology of life, which is it's that deep down reality is what how I experience the world. So when you look at it from that perspective, what the first thing you want to ask is that it's not about the gap between work as imagined and work as done. Is to understand Captain Schettino's perspective on this. That what does he think about the gap between work as imagined and work as done? And the trouble is that he doesn't see that gap. 5 years after the accident, he's still telling us that it's a normal practice. That's what I've been doing. And what are we to achieve by filling in that gap, minding that gap, supporting work when the person who is actually doing the work is not convinced that he's doing something wrong because that's his phenomenology of life, that's his experience of life. And I think this is something we need to start at that level first before we start to talk about supporting work.
That's amazing. What an answer that was. Gang, I just wondering if anybody's got any questions for Nippin before I jump into my next one. If
I
somebody's
think so.
got
I think we need to, yeah, I think we need to slow down because there's a lot we can build upon on this. And I really welcome some good questions here.
Are you saying my questions aren't good, Nippin?
Well, yes, that's what. No, I'm not saying that. I think I quite like, it's just
Yeah,
spending the next half an hour, even on this question, I don't mind. So let's just delve a little bit deep into it now. I would say so.
is it Dave? You're always a man with a thoughtful question. We get in.
And I also, one more thing I would request is that just to make it a little bit more person-centered, those who can you please turn on your cameras because it just feels a little bit more human.
And they are an attractive bunch, I have to say. Oh, somebody's. So, any thoughts? Any questions? I mean, I have a whole heap of questions here from the book, but Nippin's got this sort of wide knowledge around lots of different sort of philosophies. It'd be a shame if anybody. Yeah, mate, on you go.
Is there? I've got one. Look, if it was talking about learning and unlearning, could you tell us a little bit more about unlearning?
Sure, why not? And it's a great question. The starting point is to really understand, even before we get into unlearning and learning, that what does it mean to be a human being? I think that could be a great question to start with. And if you look at everything that we do today in risk and safety, whether you call it the new view or the old view, the contemporary or the traditional, I think you cannot escape this question, even though we never make it explicit. And a lot of what we are doing in risk and safety takes a particular view on what is a human being. And that view is essentially a Cartesian view of the world, which is that the brain controls the body. Now, there are two assumptions here. One is that the eye is the camera, and the other one is that the brain processes information and signals it to the body. And both of them are questionable. Both of them are questionable. That's not what it means to be a human being, that the brain controls the body. The brain is the control tower and body is the warehouse or whatever. The essence of being a human being is that the body, the entire human being, every part of the body has its own mind, each part of the body. And I'll take a very, very simple example because I get that all the time, jet lag. I go to another place in a different time zone, and the brain keeps telling the body that you need to sleep because you have only 6 hours and then you have to do a presentation, but the body won't cooperate. The body won't listen because the body has its own mind. And if we don't get that right, then unlearning and learning becomes a very, very big challenge. So every part of the body thinks and makes decisions. And a lot of decisions, 95% of our decisions, I would say 99% of our decisions are made in the unconscious space by the body. And what I mean by that is our habits, our heuristics, our metaphors, our gestures, our rituals, our narratives, the familiar ones like you talked about the Greek myth and the Christian myth and the Hindu myth. Where does all this live? All these beliefs actually live in our bodies. So if I was to live in India and I continue to live in India, I could probably survive with my myth. But the trouble is, I've been living in the West for the last 19 years, and those myths and those gestures and habits and rituals and my tastes and preferences don't seem to work. They don't seem to work, right? I have a neighbor next door. I'll take a very concrete example. I have a neighbor next door, and every time my boy kicks the ball, and he plays football, and he comes home and he kicks the ball, and the ball lands in his courtyard. He doesn't return the ball, and that's by law in the UK. You're supposed to return the ball. Why does he not return the ball? Because he comes from a certain part of the world where his boundary is considered his privacy. That's his symbolic meaning of a fence, and he doesn't care about the UK laws. He has an unlearned coming to the UK that is a boundary between one property and another. And if the ball actually goes on the other side, he's obliged to pass it back. He doesn't care about any of that. But it took me a while to understand what that fence means to him. And that's his learning. He hasn't unlearned that it doesn't work in the UK. And similarly, with all of us, we live with a particular set of ideas in our bodies that we never are conscious about, because 95% of the life is lived in the unconscious space. So if we don't realize those habits, those metaphors, those symbols, those gestures, those myths, those rituals, then we will never be able to appreciate another worldview. And the same thing goes for the captain of the ship. The same thing goes when you go and do your safety rounds. What you're doing is you're meeting people from another culture. It doesn't have to be religion. They could just be a subculture in the organization that does not think like you. So in order for us to understand what's going on in their world, we have to let go a little bit of what is happening in what we believe is our reality. And we are not prepared to let go any of that. So if you're not prepared to let go, you will never learn something new. If you keep holding on to the idea, no, I believe that the captain always keeps 20 miles distance from the shore, and he must do that, we will never be able to appreciate another person's reality, because all we see is non-conformance that must fit with our worldview. And unless that changes, it's very, very hard to assimilate and look at reality from another perspective. And the idea is not whether he is right or you are right. That's beside the question. The idea is, first of all, acknowledge that there is a reality outside of your worldview that exists.
Nippin, I'm wondering if your neighbour's a Rangers fan, if he keeps taking the take the ball
Well,
away from you.
yeah, it's an example, but yeah.
But mate, I was talking to Dave about this actually a few weeks ago. In the book, you talk about doubt having a seat at the learning table. You know, like what? So the idea that doubt has a seat, and I'm kind of wondering if you were talking about doubt as an entertaining doubt, because I know that I've read some of the social psychology or risk books, and they talk about entertaining doubt, and I was wondering, instead of chronic unease, you know how like
It's the same thing.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, can you maybe talk about that, entertaining doubt? Because I kind of feel like that's like a better choice of language than chronic unease. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I kind of like that.
See, if you build on to the discussion that we were having earlier, that if you keep a little bit of doubt in your mind that your worldview is never complete, there's always something more than what you know, then you will always keep space for doubt or chronic unease. I don't really care, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, the idea of doubt or entertaining doubt is missing, because we see our reality as superior to the other person. And I think therein lies a problem. And at a very classic level, one could also say that we have not understood the real meaning of a myth. So we think in science, for example, the myth is a false story. But a myth is not a false story. A myth is someone else's truth. And I like to see all myth as a partial truth, as an incomplete truth. And you have one way of looking at the world. Accidents, for example, my mother sees accidents as something that you have no control over, and it's God's will. I have to understand that that's her myth, because the moment I start to push my own idea of what is an accident, and an accidents can be explained through root causes, I know that's not 100% true either. So this is entertaining doubt is the idea that there is always more to reality. Reality is always incomplete. And I think that makes us a little bit more humble and curious about other people's worldviews.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. That's a great. just go throw it back out to the gang again. I heard the questions going there, but I don't know if anyone is.
I think, yeah, it's good to engage a little bit. It'd be lovely to hear from other people what they think, and anything they want to build upon at all.
Yeah, any thoughts? Oh, quiet bunch, Nippin. It's probably a bit late in the evening. Well, mate, I've got a bone to pick with you. I would like to ask you something. Like you talked about Captain Shiseno being the subject of multiple memes, and is it that image of the captain? Is it funny or dangerous? Where's the line between humour and harm? Because obviously, as a stand-up comedian, I love the satire and poking fun at things that should be to poke fun. But in the book, you had a sort of different view. I'm kind of wondering if you could share that view.
Yeah, I mean, there's four patterns, big patterns that emerged from the many discussions that I had with people following this accident about the captain's character. And I actually created four different monkeys at the back of the book, if you have seen it. So it actually rides on Spinoza's wisdom, which is not to lament, not to laugh, not to mock, apologize, but to understand. But I added one more to it, which I've already explained. So the four reactions were that people would either laugh at him, as you rightly said, create memes of him. People would either apologize and feel sympathetic about him. They would what was the other one? Not to laugh, not to lament, not to, yeah. They feel sorry about him. They would and also this tendency to give some sort of solutions that, oh, he should have done this or he could have done that, like we say, counterfactuals. And that goes back to the problem solving mindset that you come to every conversation to fix the person. And those are the four patterns that I saw in this in the conversations that came from engaging with lots and lots of people after I started writing this book. And I think, Steve, what is interesting about all these four different patterns is that none of them is actually helpful for unlearning and learning. What it does is it helps us to preserve our worldview. And comedy, as you very rightly know, is a wonderful way to preserve our worldview in some ways. So when you laugh at somebody, when you make mock at someone, when you make fun of their behavior, what you're doing is you are keeping intact the way you think about this person. Nothing has changed inside you. So you sympathize with him to say, oh, I'm really sorry to see what's going on in his life and he shouldn't have been there. But then you're back to normal again. But listening and understanding creates that unlearning and learning within. And I think this is something we're not very good at biologically, socially, and so on. Yeah. So to answer your question, those memes and those cartoons that we created and the mock that we made of the captain was extremely necessary. What a very human need to preserve our worldview when the ship capsized, when our world fell apart. It's no different from Donald Trump attributing the cause of the accident, the recent accident, to the DEI, which is diversity, equity, equality, and inclusiveness society. That look, these are the people who are the problem. So what is happening by pointing fingers is that we can preserve our worldview, we can preserve our myth, we can preserve our ways of seeing the world, and so nothing really changes. It's a projection in Jungian theories. Though all that we don't like about other people is basically something lacking within, but we don't want to accept that. And the interesting thing is that every other ship captain knew in the cruise industry that this was quite a normal practice, not just Kitino. A lot of people knew about it, but somehow we created that view, and it was essential to preserve our worldview.
I feel so. This week, I started doing some work with a company, and I've been out in the field, like you say, and I constantly hear these words: should, they could have, I would have done this. I'm keen. How can I start to change that narrative? How can I change that conversation? Rather, I don't want to go straight in there and go nah. I would love to. I'd love to sort of be able to sort of educate them a bit more, because it's just the counterfactuals right away. You know, they really do love just saying, oh, they should have done this, or they should be doing this, or they should be doing that. And this is a person who doesn't have a clue what the work is, or so I'm just, how can I change that conversation?
Well,
I know,
well,
sorry, I
I'm,
never
I'm,
sent
I'm
you that question.
No, I don't know where to start because the shift needs to happen within, Stephen. There's nothing wrong with all all that conversation at the end of the day. If it results in corrective action and preventative action and change of procedures, we haven't really gone very far. The question that I posed in the book was that what has changed in my world after I finished this accident? And I think that kind of a journaling of own experiences and shifting of worldview needs to be documented in some way, or needs to be realized in some way. That am I any better off after finishing this audit or investigation? Have I understand what biases and assumptions have surfaced as a result of my interaction with these people? And I think that is something we don't pay attention to, and we should.
Hey, I've got a question from Peter, who's traveling home on the bus, and he's keen to understand the significance of cultural influences at times of responding to hazards and risk. Have we missed the opportunity to include anthropology studies to understand opportunities to engage and understand differences? So that was in the, did you get that? Do you want me, it's in the questions, mate, if you want to have a, so
Sure. Sure.
keen to understand the significance of cultural influences at times of responding to hazards and risk. Have we missed the opportunity to include anthropology studies to understand opportunities to engage and understand differences?
Is it just anthropology? I would say if you read across disciplines outside of STEM, all of them encourage us to question our own biases and assumptions, question the instinctual nature of life, which is, that 95% of the decisions are made through what we call knee-jerk reactions sometimes, or through our instincts and through our intuitions. If your question is that how can we get better at this, I think the starting point is to realize that we are instinctive by nature, and it takes a deliberate person to become thoughtful and reflective. I think, and that's where the change really happens. So when we do this quite often, and it is only because it's habitual. We are habituated to it. We don't even realize that. And one place that I feel is quite powerful is to watch your own language, because a lot of language is metaphorical by nature. It's part of your it's the part of your instinct and intuitions. So pay attention to your language. Even something like I would say something as simple as record two people having a conversation and play it back to them to say how much of what they are talking is it's not scripted. It's instinctual and it's intuitive. And just to take notice of that language is a first step in understanding how biased we are and how limited our worldview is.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
it happens
amazing.
relationally, Stephen, because you cannot know you are biased. There has to be somebody else on the other side who can listen to that language. And that's why we talk about relational learning. All
Yep.
learning happens in relationships.
Yeah.
So Rob uses the very wonderful word, it's called a critical friend. So who can I trust that I can, sit down and have a coffee and talk about something, and he can actually listen to me and listen to my language and mirror my words back to me. I think it's a very, very powerful thing.
Yeah, I wonder, that's really an interesting thought, mate, actually. Yeah, like when people do hear the way that they speak, particularly when it comes to dealing with people, and you hear that word breach and should and could, and didn't follow, all these things that
But
people do.
that's yeah, but that we do that all the time, even at
Yeah,
home, even with children, the way we parent our kids, it's all about control. And by using words like they should or could have done this, that means we already have a view of how it should be done. That's
yeah,
our view of it. So, and we are not able to assimilate another view of that problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mate, I was going to talk to you about embracing fallibility. I hear you talk about this a lot, and I hear the guys talk about this stuff a lot. How do we convince leaders that showing fallibility won't ruin their credibility? And do you sometimes think that safety professionals pretend to be infallible just to sort of keep their seat at the table? I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on embracing fallibility.
Stephen, I think it's such a deep-rooted problem that if I start to talk about it now, it will take such a long time. But I will keep it really concise. And it's so deep that we don't even see it. We generously use words like people making mistakes or making errors, and risk and safety is about controlling errors or managing errors. How if you look at it from another perspective, that the human being is designed to be fallible, that if 95% of the life is lived in the unconscious space, then what are we even talking? Making mistakes means what? And we are not even conscious about the words we use, because it's not in my control that this happened. I'm an unconscious being. 95% of my life is outside of my control. As I'm speaking, my hands are moving, my gestures are moving, right? There are words I will use without even my knowledge. And you start first thing in the morning, you get out of the bed, you brush your teeth in a particular way. I use my right hand. Imagine using the left hand. I can't. So I've been tuned in a particular, my body has been tuned in a particular way to function all day, every day, and it helps me to survive. So I think the whole idea of making mistakes and making errors would mean that I'm in conscious control of myself, which I'm not. I mean, if you look at some of the accident investigation reports, it's so clear that even where people have died, we paint the picture that this person decided to do this, or they went to do that. And in my book, I actually say even the dead are not spared in this ritual of accident investigation, because we genuinely believe, implicitly, unconsciously, we believe that people are making free choices. Well, we're not. When most of the life is lived in the unconscious space, which what that means is that we are fallible human beings. And embracing fallibility is a very simple thing, but it's the most difficult thing is to sit down and have a conversation with someone without the urge to control them.
Mate, Leslie's put a comment in the chat there about cultures don't question authority as easily. Respect for hierarchy, they won't speak up. That impacts speaking up and has an impact on reporting and hazards and risk management. I had a question there about if people freeze or stay silent, why do we still act shocked when people don't speak up? I kind of wonder if you've got any thoughts. Why are we surprised when people don't speak up about things going wrong?
Why are we?
Does that make sense? So yeah, it's just like if the question I've got here is, if we know people freeze or stay silent, why do we still act shocked when it happens? What's the most powerful thing a leader can do to make speaking up feel like a safe choice? So we're just talking about that. People,
yeah, there's a
silence.
lot. Yeah, there's a lot in this question, Stephen. But let's just pick up one question: is like, why don't people speak up? I think the simple answer to that question is because nobody wants to listen. I think that's and we go back to relational learning, that all learning happens in relationships. And if there's nobody to listen, why would I speak up? And so I think that's a very obvious but a very simple answer, that that people don't speak up because there is no one to listen to. The second point is that why does this question appeal to us so much? Why don't people speak up? Just look at the framing of this question, and I think it's in some ways it's problematic to take this question to another culture, because in the Western culture, for example, avoidance of harm, freedom, liberty, autonomy. These are taken for granted kind of values. You go to another culture and they don't have these values. There is no such thing like people speaking up to say that
I've got
they have.
booking probably on the Sioux or Aspinall,
Yeah, hang on.
about 5 or 6 people.
Pete, shut up.
I mean,
Sorry, I've gone.
Yeah, you got him.
On you go, Nippin, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we are fallible, you see. We
Yeah,
are all fallible.
totally.
But you see, that question carries so much of moral baggage with it. Why don't people speak up? So there is an expectation that when injustice happens, when somebody is bullied, something they see something, they are supposed to speak up. You go to another culture, that thinking does not exist because that's not a priority in that culture. The priority in that culture is to maintain a communal relationship. Relationships are more important than the individual's autonomy and freedom and the ability to express themselves. It doesn't have any meaning in another culture. So you apply crew resource management to a Korean culture, for example, which is deeply hierarchical, and that question has no meaning, absolutely none. And there's been lots of literature. I can pass it to you. So I think we got to be very So this goes back to our, the framing of our questions, our metaphors, our worldviews. We got to just think about what sort of questions are we asking, and is that question have any meaning in another culture?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you. Gang, we're running out. So I've got 10 minutes left. Anyone got a question for Nippin? Any sort of thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
Steve, if nobody else wants to go, I'll have another crack if that's all right.
On you go, Christian. Yeah.
I'll have to home safe. Thanks, Steve. Nippin, it's Christian. I listened to what you were saying, and some of the things that you mentioned reminded me of listening to Eckhart Tolle. He talks about presence and unconsciousness is the words he uses, and the people's challenges with their ego, and because they're so invested in an identity that they have a certain level of consciousness that doesn't allow them to see other points of view, because that's what they're invested in. So
that's right.
You're talking about this, and I hear some similarities. I'm thinking about how invested are some of the safety professionals in our industry in an identity that's them, and how that affects their level of being curious. Consciousness and curiosity. You can make correlations there, and how much that affects our ability to engage and perform.
Engage and perform. Okay. Christian, I think essentially there are two things that every culture provides us: a sense of self-esteem and a sense of meaning. And by self-esteem, I think I allude to what you said, which is the idea of the ego. And that's a fascinating work done by Professor Ernest Becker. The book is called The Denial of Death. And what's important, not just in risk and safety, but in life in general, is to balance the idea of ego and self, as Carl Jung would say, that yes, there is a life lived above the shoulders, which is the head, the ego, the Cartesian mind, but there's also a lot of life which is lived in the unconscious. And so how can I, of course, it's the idea of self-preservation against the idea of belonging within a culture. And I think a good life lived is finding a balance in between, because if you live too much in the brain and you're too full of yourself, then you become a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath, whatever you want to call it. If you live too much in that space, if you live too much in the unconscious space, then obviously you are all out to be manipulated by the world, because you can easily be influenced by. And the idea is, how can I live in balance between the ego and the self? And I think this is where learning can be reconciled with healing, because the more you spend time with yourself, with your unconscious, with coming to terms with the idea that you cannot control the world, you cannot control everything, the more you are at peace with yourself and with the rest of the world. And a classic example of that, Kristen, is that I have a 13 years old girl and I can try to control her. I cannot. I can do everything in the world, but I cannot control her. And I think all of us have similar experiences as parents. We realize that not everything can be controlled because I'm superior or she is dependent on me. So we need to find a balance between ego and the self. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I was just reflecting on the fact of that investment in that identity and how that can impact on learning. Yeah.
Good on you, Christian. Thanks for that, mate. Appreciate it. Nippin, I suppose just one quick question before we sort of finish up, really. But Gary just touched on it as well in the comments there. I've put a note about no blame. Is this just a nice slogan? What's the biggest myth that people believe about it, and how do we balance accountability with learning?
Yeah, I think blame or scapegoating, as you call it, is the need, whether something happens at home or at work, and something catastrophic like what we saw in the case of Costa Concordia.
Yeah.
Because we are, going back to, we are creatures of meaning, and we need a narrative, and we need a simple narrative that we can go to bed with. So blame is, and in that sense, I think what the accident investigation does is that it gives us that political and social order. So, for example, in this particular case, if we were to say that cruise ships do go close to the land, it's quite normal. I think the whole industry would have collapsed on the night of the accident, or something terribly wrong would have happened on that night. So I think we have to be careful about slogans like "no blame," because no society in thousands and thousands of years has escaped that myth and that ritual of scapegoating. It's impossible, because when the world collapses, we need a meaning, and that's where political and social order takes priority over learning, and will always. This is why the biggest contradiction in writing this book is that there is no learning in an accident. The only learning that can happen from an accident is when you turn it inwards and it changes your worldview. But to expect that an organization will learn from an accident or society will learn from an accident is wishful thinking. That's where the idea of no blame, I think it's probably not the most appropriate way to talk about risk and safety. It's an expectation that you cannot live by. You can never live by.
Yeah. Mate, Nippin, do you have, I don't know if I've got the time to show it, but do you remember, you've got this sort of cartoon in your book that talks about the tension that Captain Shiteno would have felt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got it, and then we'll start calling time on there. But it's really, I really love this.
I thought you would bring it up. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah. And the funny thing is, based on what we spoke in the last few minutes, the interesting thing is, before the accident, the captain did not even realize he's carrying all this within him. He was totally unconscious of all these decisions, all these conflicting goals. And how interesting to go and fix the gap between work as imagined and work as done when the captain does not even see this gap. That's my question to all of you. That would be my question to all of you. How do you fix a gap that people don't even see? Because the nature of all expertise is that it lives in the body. It doesn't live in the conscious mind. Ask yourself this question: how are you to fix that gap? What is the real meaning of work as imagined or work as done, or normal work, for instance? Because my normal is not the same as the captain. Think about it.
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, it just captures the
I think
tension.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Nippin, this was amazing. Thank you. Now, we always finish up the live versions of these book clubs by asking a question about music. So I'm curious. I'm curious to know. Tell me about a song that has something real meaning to you, or would get you up on the dance floor, or an instrument that you play, because we've done that with Professor
I
Becker.
was going to say this is my instrument, but yeah, I'm a big fan of Julio Iglesias, and um, I have a story I can share.
Please.
I met my wife in 2003. She just came home after dropping the kids, actually, and um, so we met in 2002 online, and I was a sailor at that time, and I exchanged some messages with her, and then I went sailing, and she would dedicatedly send me sports news every day on board ships. Those days, we didn't have internet. We had a very limited capacity for internet, so she was very picky in terms of what she could send. So I could, otherwise the Globe Wireless system, the internet system would reject her email. So she would pick some news on tennis and on Formula One and and cricket, and she would very strategically put it in a small email. And she would do that for 6 months. And at one point, we were in Valparaiso in Chile, and I think I got drunk on my way back. I was fully drunk, and I went to the phone booth. It sounds like one of those
You're human.
Hollywood scenes, but I picked up the phone and I sang that Julio Iglesias song to her, "Crazy," which I'm not going to do now. But and I proposed to her, and the funny thing is that we at that time we didn't even know what we look like. We had no idea whatever. And so it's a story that I like to share with people who know me. So that was the start of our relationship, and it's been 2003 and 2025. Now it's been 22 years, two small little children, 9 years and 13 years, and I still sing that song sometimes. Yes, which is a good thing, I think. Yeah.
Well, mate, thank you. It's been amazing to chat to you. I mean, and we feel like we know you a bit better now for doing this.
Yeah,
So, thank you for everybody jumping in for this. This is the first time I've done this. So, yeah, maybe we'll do it again. Yeah, it was a great session, and thanks for sharing your learning with me. This will be recorded. This has been recorded, guys, and I'll do something with the transcripts, and I'll send it out as well. Yeah, thank you very much, Nippin, and thank you everybody for joining us. Take care.